Just days ago, global military watchers were debating stock markets, oil prices, and trading halts. Not a full-blown clash between two of the world's most powerful nations. But now, one question dominating analyst rooms in foreign ministries from Washington to Tehran is this: is Iran preparing for a direct war with the United States? The consequences of that answer, one way or another, would reshape regional security, global energy markets, and the balance of power from the Middle East to Southeast Asia. It's not just about missiles or headlines. It's about strategy, escalation risk, and the real evidence on the ground. Today, we break that down. To be clear, there is no public declaration of full war between Tehran and Washington, but there are layers of military buildup, proxy engagements, strategic signaling, and policy movement that suggest both sides are preparing for scenarios far beyond routine diplomacy. That's not war yet, but it raises the stakes dramatically. And understanding whether this is preparation or posturing requires looking at military deployment, historical doctrine, political incentives, and the strategic calculus in both capitals. First, let's look at force posture. In recent weeks, the U.S. has repositioned significant naval and air assets into the Middle East. Aircraft carriers, tactical fighter wings, and missile defense units are operating at high readiness in waters adjacent to Iran, a concentration not seen in the region since the early 2000s. Military analysts describe the buildup as the largest U.S. combat force deployment around Iran in decades. Some commentators interpret this as deterrence. Others see it as preparations for possible escalation should diplomacy fail. From Tehran's perspective, there are equally important indicators. Iranian leadership has publicly framed the conflict as a defensive struggle, insisting on retaliation after U.S.-Israeli strikes on Iranian territory. Iranian strategic communications emphasize self-defense and portray Western pressure as existential threats to sovereignty. That language is important. It's not inherently aggressive, but it signals a stance that Tehran believes it must deter or survive, rather than simply negotiate away pressure. But military movement and rhetoric are only part of the picture. There are three interconnected questions analysts now ask. 1. Is Iran actually moving toward offensive capability or reinforcing defensive depth? Evidence suggests Iran is bolstering multiple elements: missile units, naval assets, remote drone capability, and asymmetrical forces. This could signify preparation for sustained conflict or simply strengthening deterrence against an expected strike. Deterrence strategies often mirror offensive readiness, leading to confusion in interpretation. 2. Is the United States planning broader military action beyond strikes? U.S. leadership has publicly maintained that the current campaign, with operations targeting specific Iranian installations, is designed to degrade threat capabilities, not to instigate open, protracted war. However, senior U.S. officials recently refused to rule out sending ground forces into Iranian territory if strategic objectives demand it. That ambiguity is significant. It frames current policy as conditional rather than declarative. 3. Are diplomatic channels being used to avoid full confrontation? There have been intermittent negotiations between U.S. and Iranian representatives under the mediation of regional actors like Oman. These talks have occasionally produced what both sides called constructive language, even while conflict continued on other fronts. This suggests that even amid open hostilities, there are still incentives to avoid an outright declared war. So, is Iran preparing for direct war? The answer depends on how you interpret preparation itself. Is it mobilization for retaliation and deterrence, or preparation for sustained offensive escalation? But in the real world, military readiness and diplomatic engagement often happen simultaneously, and ambiguity is part of strategic signaling.
That ambiguity is precisely what keeps both capitals guessing at the limits of their respective intentions, and what keeps analysts, markets, and foreign policy planners awake at night.
If we move beyond headlines and examine doctrine, the picture becomes more complex. Iran's military strategy has never centered on conventional head-to-head warfare with the United States. Instead, it relies on layered deterrence, ballistic missiles, naval disruption capability in the Persian Gulf, proxy networks across Lebanon, Iraq, Syria, and Yemen, and increasingly sophisticated cyber operations. This approach is designed not to defeat a superpower outright, but to raise the cost of confrontation to politically painful levels. That distinction matters. Preparing for deterrence can look identical to preparing for war. Iran's missile arsenal remains its most visible instrument of power. Short and medium-range ballistic missiles, cruise missiles, and drone systems provide Tehran with the ability to target regional bases, shipping lanes, and allied infrastructure. Public military exercises and weapons unveilings often serve dual purposes: domestic messaging and external signaling. When missile units reposition or conduct drills, analysts must ask whether this reflects imminent offensive intent or calculated signaling aimed at discouraging escalation. In strategic environments, visibility itself becomes a tool. Naval doctrine adds another layer. The Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps Navy has long emphasized swarm tactics, using fast attack craft, mines, and anti-ship missiles in narrow waterways. The goal is disruption, not sustained sea control. In a crisis, even limited harassment of shipping could spike insurance premiums and energy prices. Yet harassment differs from declaring total war. Disruption can remain calibrated, allowing escalation without crossing into irreversible confrontation. That gray zone is where much of today's tension lives.
Proxy networks further complicate the equation. Groups aligned with Tehran operate in multiple theaters, and their activities can escalate pressure without direct state-to-state engagement. Rocket fire, drone launches, or militia mobilization can increase risk while maintaining plausible distance from formal declarations. From Washington's perspective, however, repeated proxy strikes on U.S. personnel or facilities blur that distinction. The danger lies in cumulative escalation, small incidents stacking into a larger response cycle neither side initially intended. Cyber capabilities are another under-discussed factor. Iran has invested significantly in cyber operations over the past decade, targeting financial institutions, energy companies, and infrastructure abroad. Cyber actions provide asymmetric leverage without traditional battlefield engagement. A surge in cyber probing or infrastructure disruption could signal preparation for broader confrontation, or it could function as retaliatory messaging short of kinetic war. Again, interpretation determines perceived intent. So what would actually indicate preparation for a direct war rather than deterrence? Analysts look for several markers: sustained mass mobilization beyond routine readiness, large-scale reserve activation, evacuation of civilian leadership, long-duration logistics stockpiling, or formal alliance commitments for joint combat. At present, publicly available information does not conclusively show those markers. Instead, what we see resembles calibrated positioning, serious, tense, but still bounded. Political incentives also weigh heavily. For Tehran, a declared full-scale war risks severe economic damage and internal instability. For Washington, escalation carries regional consequences, alliance pressures, and domestic political calculations. Both governments must balance credibility with restraint. That dynamic often produces brinkmanship rather than immediate open warfare. History shows that deterrence failures typically occur through miscalculation, not deliberate desire for catastrophic conflict.
Markets move on fear before war begins. Oil and safe haven assets react to signals, not battles. Is Iran preparing for direct war? There is readiness for confrontation, not certainty of war.
The real danger is miscalculation.